We better talk quick, I guess. It's going to get cold out here on us.
Welcome back to Infinity Outdoors Timeless Memories. We've got a real special one today. I'm going to welcome to the podcast my buddy Josh. Those who know him and love him call him Bean. It seems to be the nickname he's grown into. But yeah, really excited to have him here. He's going to be expressing some of the things that he's learned and some things he wants to share about a specific type of hunting, something that's not necessarily traditional, but something that takes your hunting game to the next level, gets you more into what would you consider it, more native, I guess.
It is
art.
primitive in a way.
Yeah,
it is.
So without further ado, this is Josh. I'll let him introduce himself and tell you a little bit about himself.
Yeah, my name is Josh Alberts. Like Cody said, a buddy. We're both local to this area. Met down at the bow shop, and he was kind and gracious enough to invite me here. So thanks for having me on. Glad to come out here. Beautiful place we got here. We're sitting by the river. This is awesome. So I'm excited to spend some time here and share some memories and some learning experiences that kind of changed the way that I hunt and what I get out of it.
So what got you into like the outdoors? What was it that like sparked your interest and you were just like, yes, like this is why I live. I want this to be a part of my life forever. Like what gives you that drive, that strive to get up in the morning or to be out late at night on a hunt or a stalk, or if you're waterfowl hunting or trapping, any one of those scenarios, like what pushes you to do it?
I think that it started so early for me, growing up in this area. Most of us hunter fish in some capacity, but my dad had me out there. Those are my first memories. That's the first things that I remember doing is picking mushrooms, picking berries with my grandparents in their garden, being out on hunts, family hunts, being in a place where during a certain time of the year this was just something that happened. So in one way I've never known any different. But in another, as I got older and started to work or go to school, things like that, time spent away from it really showed me how ingrained in me that it was. So I've always made a point to, high school sports were everything for a little while, but as it progressed beyond that, this is the one thing that stuck, that stayed a constant in my life. Mm-hmm. And now it's everything. My world revolves around the outdoors. I've found my way into position to work in the outdoors. Just recently had Cody down to the property that I work on and manage.
Which, by the way, that's a super beautiful piece of property as well. It's huge. A lot of different. I don't know. I have a loss of words really when I try to describe it.
The scale is
anyone.
hard to take in until you're there to see it. It's
exactly.
Big acres. It's a lot of the same things employed in different areas of the property. I'm very familiar with it, so these sub areas make a lot of sense to me. But from a grand scale, there's been a lot of change to the landscape in the past 5 years that I've been working there. I was just out, spreading some fertilizer today. We had our soil test done and got some blended products from local, and working on building these things up, taking areas that were completely timbered at one point, harvesting them under a supervised forestry plan, and then reshaping those areas after that timber harvest and creating something that was never even there. Now we have some beautiful food plots that we're working on every year, and some long-term goals in changing the landscape and the access, not only for us but for the deer and all the other critters as well. Like you said, the scale is quite large. So there's waterfowl, there's whitetail, there's turkeys, there's trapping. I trap a bunch out there.
There's porcupines.
There's porcupines.
There's
definitely porcupines out there. We've had a problem with them and hunting dog interactions. So the porcupine thinning has occurred.
Oh yeah.
They're becoming a limited species out there.
So speaking of deer, I know in previous episodes, I've talked about my hunting experiences, but as much as I love that, I've seen and read stories about guys that go out in this more primitive nature, and
Mhm.
they take it to the next level, and they're spot and stalk, and they're crawling through the tall grass, climbing these cliff sides, and really trying to get those really odd shaped oblong type angles, having to hold a position in such a weird way that is not normal. It's not usual. Like for instance, if you were to compare it to like sitting in a ground blind, or sitting in a tree stand, or an elevated tower blind, in any of those situations, it's just a completely different dynamic. And what I've heard is you've had a few instances, maybe even more than just a few, that you've gone and done that with different species here in the state of Michigan and in different states, across the
Mhm.
country.
Mhm.
Um, and I kind of want to dive into that. I want to relish in your experience as far as what it takes. What are the things that those guys that kind of elaborate on how great of a hunt it was? What aren't they talking about? What are some of those things that people don't think about or that don't see until they're there and in it and having to work through it themselves?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that the first thing that people don't think about is that it sucks.
It
It
sucks.
sucks in the moment when you're there, when you're doing it, being out there and being exposed to the elements, having no refuge aside from what
Right.
you
Yeah.
bring with you. There's a whole thought process on self-sustenance and how you're going to get to these places and then go out into these areas, and what your experience is going to be like, what you can take with you
Hmm.
is a limiting factor. And every point, if you stay in a hotel and then drive and then walk, that's one thing. But if you go past the hotel and then you park and then you hike and then you camp and then you walk, there's layers and levels. And I won't say that I've done the most extreme things out there, but I have hunted in 6 states now. Most of that has been, well, half of that.
Well, what states
Half of that,
exactly?
half of that has been archery, and some of it has been rifle. My first experience was with a rifle, and then
Okay.
I came back home, um, and I started hunting with my bow again, and that was the first time that I went spot and stalk over my coveted tree stands and my well manicured
Right.
spots and my spotless access and my scent control. That's a whole game that we as eastern whitetail hunters in Michigan, we grew up with baiting.
Yeah. Right.
That
Yeah, we did.
we walked out into the woods and we climbed up in a ladder stand that our dads put out there for us, and we
Hmm.
sat over bait pile. And that was all I knew. And then, baiting got banned and eliminated, so that changed some things. And hunting was always find a spot and then sit and wait.
Hmm.
I went out west and I hunted in Montana with my rifle in 2013, and that was the first time that obviously the landscape is just so vastly different. When we're hunting out there, it could be 10, 20, 30,000 acres. You
Hmm.
can actually walk miles, whereas here in Michigan, this is a beautiful piece of land, but it's still only 80 acres. If you really
Exactly.
wanted to walk from one end to the other, it
You
wouldn't
could
take
do
that
it.
long,
Right.
and you'd see what it had to offer. Take all these trees and foliage off of this landscape, and it doesn't actually look any different,
Right.
but I perceived it differently. So now I come home and I hunt and I see terrain and hills, and I see them differently than I did previously. And then I hunt in my tree stand and I see some deer come out a couple hundred yards away. And for the first time in my hunting career, in my life, in Michigan, I thought, why don't I get down and go over there? At the end of the day, my goal is to be where the deer are. I want to have an
Right.
interaction. And I got down and moved. And I stalked those deer at my home farm with my bow for the first time, because I had hunted a different way and my eyes were open to different tactics for the first time.
So what you're saying is that someone who has been, you know, kind of curated in this hunting world that they've made themselves, which is in some sort of hunting setting where they're in a blind or in a stand, doesn't necessarily have an appreciation or like a found respect for being out in vast land like that. Like you're saying that it takes, you personally going out there and experiencing it firsthand for you to actually try to figure out on your own that it's more than just finding a spot, but finding the animal itself.
A little bit. I don't know that people who hunt what's the common way that we experience here, the common whitetail methods of box blinds, ambush spots, funnels, pinch points. I don't think that they don't appreciate the great landscape.
Right.
But I hadn't seen it, so I didn't know what I was looking at. Until I got out there, it was more of a realization that I could apply those. I didn't think I could apply those tactics here. I thought this was how we hunt at home. This is how we hunt there. When I came home, I realized that I was looking at the landscape differently. It opened my eyes to more opportunities at home that I wasn't realizing before. I've always tried to hunt at a high level and be meticulous and have great stand placement and shoot good quality deer at home. But I was very set in a way that I thought that I had to do that. My experience opened my eyes, and I felt like I broke my mold.
I see what you're saying.
And it made me more aware of more opportunities. And now when I hunt, it's not like it was. I may still, on the right day, on the right wind, absolutely, I'm going to be in that tree stand on that inside corner or on that funnel. And I've hunted. I do have some private property that I hunt with my brother, and we've spent several years out there. We've got some great tree stand spots. We've got a great rifle spot in a box blind that's taken a few bucks over the years. But sometimes the deer are just out doing deer things.
Right, yeah.
And if they're not doing deer stuff near my deer stand, they're almost irrelevant to me until I realize that there's a hill, there's a rise, there's a bush, there's a tree. If I circle them and I change the wind direction, I change my scenario and I change my interaction. And I began to start to stalk these deer or even sit like an observation spot where then I would see what's going on this evening. If they're going to be over here this evening or they're going to be over here this evening, I would sit back and observe and then go in, which is, in effect, glassing.
Right, yeah, okay.
But I was using a tree stand in a wooded scenario to do the same thing.
Right, you just weren't looking at anything through a magnified lens. You were just looking at things that you could see within eye distance.
I took that great scale that I experienced out west and shrunk it down to my property.
Okay.
And then I was sitting in my tree stand so that I could see, if they want to walk out into the field with the wind into their face and be protected, they can do that. But if I'm sitting in front of them, they're walking in downwind of me, so I would sit back. And it gave me opportunities to move in and use the landscape, sometimes in a stalk or sometimes even just sitting on the ground.
Right.
Just saying, hey, there's not an ideal tree right here, but there's a terrain feature or a bush or a shrub or a fence row. I hunt in a fence row at my property all the time. That's something that I can get in and out of without being seen when they're in low cover, and then when they come out into between two wide open fields, there's this tiny patch of cover that I can slip in. I don't get a tremendous amount of crossing. I don't get picked off too much because I can choose how far I push in based on the wind and how close I get to any one location. And sometimes it's one or two or three hunts, and you wind up on the spot where you're going to take the shot. And that has kept me from just marching all the way in and going into the woods and then going up in my trusty tree stand that I go into every time that I hunt. It helped me to not spot burn so bad. It helped me to not wear my property down so bad and still have potentially more interactions. If I go in and I sit in a spot and I hang my night on that spot and I say, this is it, and they don't come out by me, then I'm off the mark for some reason. But by incorporating spotting and stalking and ground hunting, I can be in the game more often because I have more options.
I see.
And that's really the transition that at home happened after I experienced hunting out west.
And I think that's a good point, because even in some of the classes that I've taken, the professor would always talk about, okay, you may have like your holy grail spot, but you can't rely on that. You can't overhunt that. You have to have some diversity. You have to have different like variety of where you can be at different times with different winds and just all the different variables like put together. You have to have more than just a couple. I would say a good safe bet, if someone was to have certain spots that they're going to sit and then change up, or maybe sit a spot like 2 times, like 2 hunts in a row, and then change up and go to a different location. I would say like 6 or 7. That way, at least, because here's another thing too. Not everyone's going to hunt all 7 days out of the week either.
Right. Most of us aren't.
And
Wish we could, but
yeah,
I can't. Right? I can't. You can't.
And so with that being said, like I said, with 6 to 7, I feel like that gives you just enough where, let's say if you hunted 3 days out of the week for like a month period, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would give you just enough to space your sitting out and actually be able to, with cameras or cell cameras, however you're getting this information and analyzing how the deer are moving, you should be able to like set yourself up at least for some sort of success in that aspect of, if you weren't in a position to spot and stalk, but if you were just traditionally like hopping up in that one tree stand or that one box blind. But I want to hear about something personal that you experienced, whether it be here in Michigan or in Montana, or I know you hunted in South Dakota, or just any of the other states that you've been to. I want to hear your personal side of like the last 12 hours up until the moment you harvested an animal, 12 hours prior to that. And I want to hear what you have to say about that window of time and how you went about, targeting whatever animal was that you took your harvest tag for, or even how you prepared for it. Like I said, I want to hear your side. I want to get into your mind, and I want to know what your thought process was and how you accomplished that.
How long you got?
How long you got?
It's experiences, right? Experiences build how we shape, how we perceive, and how we make our hunting decisions. So I will use this past season was a meaningful hunt for me, and a lot of things came together. Mm-hmm. So basically, I have tried 3 times to successfully spot and stalk archery mule deer, a couple different places, going out west and hunting some big vast terrains, glassing, spotting and stalking. I've fallen in love with that type of hunting, that type of adventure, and honestly, arguably more than the hunting even itself, it's the landscapes. I mean,
I can imagine, honestly. Yeah.
It's a tangent. I'll circle back, but it's funny to go out there and people say, "Oh wow, you're from Michigan. Like Michigan's beautiful. You have all these trees and rivers and lakes, and here's a river, and like past 10 lakes on the way here."
Right.
We do, but we also have all these woods, so you can't. Most of the time around here, unless you're in an agricultural field, which is not truly the natural setting,
really, yeah,
you can't see more than 100 yards or 150 yards. You go out there and you can see the land, and I'm drawn to that. I love that. I love those big landscapes, which got me out there in the first place. So circling back to that, I tried a couple times, and not having ever been able to experience that style before, because of where I hunted and how I knew to hunt, it was a learning curve. And there's definitely a lot of tricks and techniques and things that you got to screw up time and time and time again. It took me 3 trips in 3 states, and the third state was a solo hunt, which was my first, and it was also my first time to that state. I had no experience. I scouted, I drew a tag. It was a surprise. I went and I map scouted, and I went to a place I'd never seen. I went into a state I'd never even driven through, never flown in an airplane over. So everything that I knew was my homework at home this time of the year.
Right.
So getting there, I get there, and
Now, was this state land, or was this like
this is all public land.
Okay.
I haven't done anything with guides or anything on private land out of the state. I've gone in groups every time except for the last one, and this one was solo. So it was special to me. It was a testament. I wanted to test myself, not foolishly. I didn't want to put myself into a potentially precarious situation, but I wanted to see what I could do, because I thought that I had figured some things out that were going to allow me to actually pull this off. And a lot of people you would hear say, oh, mule deer, they're dumb. They just jump out there and they stand there and look at you. They are masters of hiding in their environment. It is not hard to see deer. To look at such a vast landscape and see deer is not a hard thing to do at all. In fact, it's distracting, because here you're in one spot and you're looking for deer right here. There, I could be looking a mile or more. I could see deer over here and see deer over here and see deer over here. They're completely unrelated, and I can hunt all of it.
Right.
So it's how far do you want to go to get after one? But what was kind of unique about this hunt, to your question, the 12 hours leading up to my deer was quite a roller coaster. I went out there in early November, Halloween on. I had 2 weeks slated for the hunt. I got there. The first day I was there, I actually wound up in the urgent care. I didn't realize I had a tick lodged in my leg from home, and I had after hiking and my pants and stuff rubbing the first day or two, it really got irritated. So I had to go in and get some meds. I got detoured, but I actually wound up going to a different spot, a different location than what I had started in. Where I first started, I had a plan to drive back in and then hike out and then camp and hunt from that location. And the weather was unseasonably cold. There was a snowstorm there before I got there, and it was frigid. So when I got there, I actually couldn't get to where I wanted to get, and I had to be very wary of my truck. That's obviously my only connection to the outer world. Yeah. Once I leave my truck, that's my safety net when I get back. I have to be able to get back to my truck or leave with my truck ultimately. Right. So the roads out there, a lot of them are nothing more than a single track.
Yeah.
And you drive back in, and it's hard to turn around, but it's a lot of clay. They're non-maintained. If I park in the wrong spot and the weather changes, you might not be able to drive out of where you are. So I pulled out of this location because I couldn't go far enough without risking losing my truck to muddy roads and just being stranded out there. God forbid, then I get a deer, I've got meat, I'm on a deadline, I've got to take care of that stuff. That's a whole separate ball of wax. But the day that I got my deer was the switch. We had this weird, unusual cold front come in. So hunting up to that, I had been hunting in the cold, in the snow. And then everything froze. And then you're crunching, everywhere. It's incredible noise. The crunching snow on that day. It's 4 degrees out. The wind's blowing 20 miles an hour. Spot and stalk hunting, you're doing the opposite of what the deer are.
Right.
They want to be hidden from the sun or utilizing the sun depending on what's going on, and they want to be on the lee side of a feature. They want to be protected from the wind, so you're sitting up in the open looking into the weather to see them find refuge from the weather.
Right.
So you're just getting blasted by the snow and the sun and the wind, and that's the part that sucks.
Right.
But for some reason, I don't mind sitting out there and shivering for hours on end because I can see deer. And if I can see deer, I might see the deer. And if I see the deer, there might be a play.
Right.
And at any minute, that can change.
Mm-hmm.
So my lead up to my actual harvest was, it got colder than the forecasted, and it got too cold for what I had. I had to hike out to my truck. I slept in my truck with it running to run the heat every couple hours. With the wind, blowing exhaust. I was in a wide open space on top of a hill, but I had to use my truck to fall back on. It was too cold to tent camp for the gear that I had with me. But I had found some deer, and I had been following a deer for 2 days that I really wanted to get a shot at. And I had taken a stab at it unsuccessfully the day prior. So I went back to that area, and I didn't see him, but I saw a deer that I wanted to take. So the day that I shot him, it went from 4 degrees in the middle of the night, sleeping in my truck, to an early hike into a vantage point through the crustiest, loudest snow. Of course, it's it's early in the morning. The wind is low. It's the most god awful noise you've.
Yeah.
You just cringe if you could imagine how far away that you think there's not even going to be any deer when you get there, just because it's so crunchy.
Loud.
So I get there, I get to my vantage, I sit down. It's before daylight. I wanted to make that disturbance and then let things cool out. So that day, starting off, I've got my puffies on. I'm freezing. I'm facing into the wind. I'm facing into the sun. I find a deer, and he comes up, and he actually beds very, very close, within yards of where the buck I had previously stalked bedded. So I had already actually attempted a stalk on this area, and I had picked a route. Where I was, it's flat on the top. It's erosional. It's very steep and very rugged and broken, but it's erosional. So it's flat on the top, and the hills go down. So there's a lot of cliff bands and faces along at the top. So I have to hike all the way around to get the wind right for me. And then there's a limited amount of spots where I can physically climb down in and get to a gradient that I can walk or stalk on.
Right.
So I spot him in the morning, and I put him to bed, knowing that I've got a route to this area. And I actually pulled out and went all the way around, got my truck, drove around the block, and came in from the other side. And then started my stalk for the afternoon from that side, knowing that I had to wait to stalk because I could not stalk in the conditions with the crunchy snow.
Right.
That day went from 4 degrees to 48 degrees.
Wow.
So from
That's
first
quite the
light,
jump.
I'm freezing, I'm in my puffies. By the time I get back to my truck, I've worked up a sweat from wearing my clothes and hiking. And then I get all the way around, and I'm changing my layers.
Right.
Because the temperature is rising 10 degrees every couple hours. So I come in from the other direction, and I've obviously shed some clothing, and I'm in lighter layers, but not very light layers.
Right.
So I start my stalk, and I get to the location where I can drop in, and it's a brushy draw, it's very steep. So there's brushy draw, and I'm going to use a hill face to come down behind to block my view from the deer. He's over here. If I'm behind the roll of that hill, he can't see me. So I come down in on the back side of that, and I work my way down. And crawling downhill is one of the hardest things you've ever done with a bow
I
in
can
your hand.
imagine.
never thought about it, but for whatever reason, if I stood up, I could see over the crest of the hill. I was exposed. So I had to, at a minimum, crouch.
Right.
But with all the sticks and all the brush and a bow, and you're now in the protected side of the valley, which is why he's there.
Right.
So you don't have the wind noise. I'm still downwind, and then I've got to come down the hill, and I've got to figure out how the wind is coming down through there to actually go to him. So I crawled down, and it's just like opening a stick and stepping through and closing a stick and then grabbing your bow and then moving your bow and then you're moving your bow through this and then you're moving it through that and you're pushing it ahead and you're scooching on your butt, and it takes forever.
Right.
The advantage I have is that every once in a while I can stand up and I'm just narrowly using this terrain, but I can play peekaboo, and he's still there, and he's still there, and he's still there. I get down to a point where I'm at like 150 yards, but I need to expose myself to get into bow range. There's a spot where he can just see that whole hillside. There's nothing. So I used a tuft of grass that I army crawled to, and then I rolled to a rock, and then to a stump, and then ping-ponged my way through there, just waiting until I could see his demeanor. If he was looking away, I would move. If he was looking my direct, they kind of stare off into space a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll catch them, and they're just like, you're up on the hillside, and they're just looking. They're just looking up there. And if you're not moving, at 150 yards, they probably don't see you unless you're silhouetted or skylined or something. But I had to crawl on my belly, pushing my bow through the grass out in front of me for a good bit, probably 50 yards. And then I could drop off the backside. And when I dropped off of that final pitch, I was below his line of sight. He was in a depression above a hill in front of me. And at that time, that part was shaded. So I went from a full sun hillside that had no snow, it had burned off.
Right.
So I went from crunchy grass and breaking sticks to a shaded spot that still had snow. So then, but it had warmed up enough. So I had to test the snow to make sure that it had softened enough to not crunch.
Yeah, it would ruin everything. If
Or when snow melts and gets wet, it gets dense and packy, and you step in it, and it every time you step, it's compacting and makes this scrunching noise. And now I know I'm within 70 yards.
Okay.
So I then work up the draw. The wind is coming over and then pulling down the draw that I'm in. So it's actually coming over his back. He thinks he's safe, but then it's curling, and that draw is pulling it down right into my face. So I tippy-toe, twisting my feet, and just the slowest controlled movements. It took 3.5 hours.
Jeez.
To go like 300 yards. But I watched him from 800 or 900 yards away, and then hiked a couple miles to get there, to then pull off the stalk. So it was just super slow going, painstaking, and just sometimes he's looking your direction. You don't know if he can see you. You don't know that he can't.
Right.
You can't help but make some noise. You make a noise and you think, did he hear that?
Is he gone?
If I peek my head up over here, is he even there anymore? Did he just get up and wander off and go do deer stuff elsewhere? Anything could happen.
Right.
So I'm counting on this deer even being there.
Yeah.
Because now I'm out of his view too. So I stalk up through the snow and I hit a trail that they crossed, which kept the grass beaten down pretty good. And I tiptoed up that, and I got to the crest of the hill. And I knew that he was within 40 yards on the backside. And there happened to be a perfect rock about waist height.
Mm-hmm.
And I slid up to the rock, and I sat on the rock, and I picked my feet up, and I got my heels under me, and I got balanced, and I stood with my rangefinder on top of my bow, and when I crested that, I could peer through the grass. He was at 25 and a half yards in his bed still. This morning, I started on that knob up there, and I spotted two muleys from this big basin. One came up on this side, eventually wound up somewhere over in there. The other one came in up this hillside, across this hill. He came down, and he bedded on the end of this tree. He laid down right there. We waited to see if it was initial, but if he would have a secondary bed, but he stayed. Shade moved in, shade came right down over him, and he tunkered in and went to sleep. I backed out over the top, walked a half a mile to my truck. I drove all the way around this giant basin, way over, parked on the other side. And I had a snack, and I hiked back in, and I dropped. I checked that he was still there from that third pine tree at the top. I dropped this chute down in a nasty, nasty hellhole. All those trees, all that brush, it's all laid down, it's all blowed over. I crawled and crawled through there for 2 hours. I got from there to there. I snuck out because of the rock behind this pine tree. I got level with him, snuck out to that rock. I verified again. He was in his bed. So then I butt slid back down into the draw, crawled around to this rock, and I popped over that rock, and I saw he was still in his bed. And then I crawled around that rock, and I hunkered in that log, and I peered over the log, and he was still there. And I butt scooched down to this little road, and I belly crawled this little road for 40 yards right here. He laid his head down and went to sleep, and I crawled the last 10 yards, and I crawled out to this bush, and I dropped into this valley on the backside of this hill. And I snuck up the hill behind, and I came out by that rock right there. Ranged him. He was looking away from me. He was quartering hard away from me. And I stood up and drew and shot him at 25 yards in his bed. He mule kicked up out of his bed, did a little circle, and was standing right about in here at 30 yards when he stopped and turned around and was looking back at his bed. He had no idea what happened. Zipped right through him. So I loaded another arrow, drew, stood up. He still didn't know I was there. Punched him through the heart. 30 yards. He ran up over the hill and landed right there in the bottom. And there is my solo South Dakota mule deer buck with bow and arrow. First day of November? I think. I can't tell. He was facing, if it were a clock face, he was facing with his rump at 7 and his head and chest at like 1 o'clock. So it was a quartering away, bedded down, and I probably had 8 to 10 feet of elevation on him from where I was at.
Right.
So I dropped back down, knock my arrow, draw my bow, set my sight. Obviously, I adjusted my sight before I drew my bow. And I stood just slowly at full draw. It's anything that flashes really, really trips him, but a really slow, controlled movement. Mm-hmm. I stood right up, and he was just staring off into space, and I would have been, quartering to his right and in front of him, and he just Never even looked my way.
Dang.
And it went in at the last rib and came out the front of the neck and buried into the ground. And he was done.
I bet that was like a real that had to have been like the most surreal moment of your life, like actually seeing that and like being so close.
Something about that process, being so involved with it and getting beat up,
Right.
I was getting my butt kicked.
Right.
And nothing means anything until you go on a stalk. But most of the time when you go on a stalk, it doesn't work. So, I'm having flashbacks to the last one that I busted here and the one that I busted over there, the one that caught my wind on a swirl. So now I'm reading the terrain better than I used to. And I wanted to, my goal was to shoot a mule deer buck in his bed without him being aware of my presence. I just thought that would be cool, and that's what I wanted to do. That was my goal.
And it sounds like you accomplished that goal.
And I did, and it wasn't 70 yards, it wasn't 100 yards, it wasn't, a lot of things that it could have been that I prepared for.
Yeah.
It was a sweet 25.5-yard shot, and he never even looked my way. In fact, he jumped up and mule kicked and took 2 bounds and turned around, and he was looking back at his bed. He didn't know what hit him. He wasn't even looking my direction. I'm standing there with my bow at this point, and I have shot him now, and he's looking at his bed going, I don't know what just happened. I gave him another one right through the heart, and he went over the hill and died. And when I went over that hill and saw him laying there, something washed through me that's so tangible because I was there and I felt it and I experienced it, but it's so difficult to put into words. It's emotional, it's scary, it's relief, it's gratitude, it's excitement, it's adrenaline, it's so many things. You've been on pins and needles and just hyper focused and monitoring every single thing you do for days on end. And you go all the way out there all by yourself, and there he is. And it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. There's not a singular word that I can put on it and just stamp it, nice and neat. It doesn't exist. But that's the why, right? That's why.
That's the why, exactly.
That's why I'm passionate about it and continue to strive to make sure that it's a part of my life, because it's very important to me, because I can have those memories and those experiences.
I'm not gonna lie, I feel like I fell in love with the idea of going on my own spot and stalk now.
Yeah.
Just by hearing your experience. And I feel like now that you've tried to put into perspective and into words, even though it's not possible, but you gave it a good college try.
A for effort.
You're right. I want to strive for that. I'm gonna give that a shot. After hearing that, I think I'm gonna give that a shot once, at least once. I can't. And I feel like it's really unfair of me to say, but in some realistic sense, I don't feel like I am a true hunter if I don't,
Right.
Like, not that doing the, sitting in a stand all the time or sitting in a box blind, and not, doing this type of spot and stalk hunting or whatever doesn't mean you're, a true hunter, because you're hunting.
Absolutely.
And you're harvesting animals. But just that indigenous, that primitive, that tag you can put on that. Like, I am hunting the same way, my ancestors hunted.
Yep.
And I think
we're here because somebody figured out how to put critters on the table with a stick and a string.
Mm-hmm. And so
my stick and string is way more advanced.
You're right. Yeah,
it's
way more advanced.
But and it's still hard. So that's where that's another level even beyond that. But you're right. You bring up a great point in the fact that we all can share the same passion, but there's a common points of division between different factors, if you will. I'm not sharing my story to say if you don't do it the way that I do it, that there's anything wrong with that, because there
Right,
is
yeah,
not.
and there's not anything wrong with that.
But this is a different way of doing it that I have learned that I enjoy for a different set of reasons. And some point, I'm not physically going to be able to do that anymore. And I'm going to
Right.
have to, I'm going to have to learn how to hunt with my physical abilities for the rest of my life. That's always the game. I'm going to have to figure out how to get out there so I can continue. But as for right now, I am
Sticking to it.
entrenched in spot and stalk. Mule deer hunting is my favorite thing on the planet right now, and probably will be for several years. And to your point, because I went out and experienced that and changed the way I hunted here. Last 5 bucks I've shot in Michigan have been from the ground, and have been within 29 yards was the farthest shot on them in the past few years. And I'm sitting on the ground. It's a hybrid,
Right.
I may sit, I may move a lot until I find some activity for the evening, and then I'll make a play on whatever's going on that evening. I get a lot of opportunities to interact with deer, or see deer, or watch deer, and I just don't quite close the deal. But it keeps me engaged, and it keeps me, keeps my finger on the pulse of what's going on too.
It keeps like
Of-
your
of-
skill like fine-tuned, like you're always
Yep.
you're there with the beat of the moment. Like you're not letting that die. You're not just saving that for those out west hunts. You're doing it here.
Yeah.
So you're keeping all your edges sharp.
Sometimes you stalk over and it's a wide open alfalfa field.
Yeah.
What am I gonna do? The closest I can get is 90 yards.
What
It
am I
is-
gonna do?
It's there's nothing between you and them, and we're talking whitetails, and
Yeah.
they're cagey, and they get shot at, and they run away real fast. They don't like it, and this year I came home and shot a buck on the ground here after I went out there and shot a buck, and that was awesome. That was me hunting just kind of the way that I hunt in two very, very, very different places. But it still opens my mind up to the realm of possibilities. And I think that was the biggest eye-opening for me, seeing how many ways and how different we can all do it and still achieve the same goal.
Right.
It's really special.
Well, honestly, I feel like I have learned so much just in this conversation alone, this story alone, as far as, just the meticulous detail, that you talked about.
I didn't get that deep.
Well, no, but even still, like with this short version that you gave, there was enough detail there where I could almost put myself there and feel some of those physical, I guess, pieces of your story. And so, and I hope that, you guys listening too have taken something away, from Josh here, because he's very experienced in doing what he does, and he's very, intelligent and knows a lot about the realm of deer movement, the realm of, how deer feed, how deer do anything deer stuff. Like he just knows it. And so that comes with experience. He's been doing it for a long time. But
More years than I'd like to admit.
yeah. Well, I appreciate you guys, taking the time to watch and to listen. And I thank you, Josh, for being
Yeah,
here
no problem.
and doing this with me, because, this is something that, I think is special to you personally, but also something that I think, should be shared and reflected on by those who have done it or haven't done it yet and are thinking about it. And I think it's a good way for them to kind of see how someone who has done it talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. And so, like I said, I appreciate you watching. Thank you very much. Leave a like and subscribe, maybe even comment, ask some questions to me or even Josh personally, and I'm sure we'll have some answers coming to you soon. So
Yeah, I'm active. Feel free to reach out, and I'm an open book, and I enjoy sharing my stories and experiences, because if you keep it all to yourself, it means nothing.
right.
It's meant to be shared and enjoyed by yourself and those around you. So reach out on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as well. And you can find my stuff out there, and We'll catch you on the next one.
Oh, yeah.